Hi, Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane, and today I'm very excited to share with you a super simple and easy way to make half rectangle triangle quilt blocks just like this one. If you're not familiar with half rectangle triangles or HRTs, they are kind of the wonky cousin to a half square triangle, so you might have heard of HSTs, half square triangles. If you've mastered the half square triangle, you are ready to try out this new fun way to make a quilt block. Inside this tutorial, I'll teach you a simple and easy way to make HRTs, but you should know there are other methods available that you can make them as well. This tutorial will show you a simple one at a time method that doesn't require much trimming or squaring up at the end. Some other methods, you can make them two at a time, but you do have to trim them, and I personally find that that gets a little bit more tricky. So for this tutorial, we'll be cutting out our triangles and then sewing them together. The HRTs that I'll be making in this tutorial are the 1:2 ratio. So these are twice as tall as they are wide. There are other HRTs that you can make as well that are 1:3 ratio or even 1:4 ratio. So there are lots of different ways to make this wonky shape in lots of different sizes. In order to make this half rectangle triangle quilt block, we'll need some supplies. So let's cover the supplies that you'll need. First off, some fabric, two different colors. Maybe I'm going to be using like a background fabric and then a color fabric, but two different colors of fabric are required in your desired sizes. You can probably just use scraps if you're just testing out how to make the block, or if you're following a specific pattern, make sure that you're looking at the pattern for the fabric requirements. If this is your first time making half rectangle triangles, I do recommend making a few test blocks just to get the hang of it before you use your fabric for your specific project. Other than fabric, you will need all the essential quilting tools for making quilt blocks. So that might be rotary cutter, a cutting mat, some rulers, which I'll get into later. You can use rulers, templates, or even AccuQuilt. But then other than that, you will also need your sewing machine, thread, and iron, maybe some little scissors. So all the typical sewing and quilting tools are needed. If you do want to square up your blocks at the end, I personally don't. But if you want to make sure for accuracy, you'll also need a square or rectangle ruler. So now that we've covered the supplies that you need for making your HRTs, let's cover the specific rulers or AccuQuilt dies that you'll need to follow along. So if you are using templates, you can definitely use templates for those if you're using a specific pattern. My Jubilant quilt pattern does include templates, or if you're using a different pattern that has templates included, you can go ahead and just use the templates. But it can be a little bit easier to use rulers. So let me share with you some that I recommend. A lot of different rulers will work for making HRTs using this method. So the ones that I will be using in this tutorial are actually by Planted Seed Designs, and it's a set that comes with two different rulers. This is a triangle and a square ruler set. So it'll come with this big triangle ruler that is technically the center of the triangle in a square, and then it'll come with the side. So that side matches up to the center, but for this tutorial, we're just using the side. So you don't need the center one. And you can just use this simple ruler for your entire quilt block. If you don't have that ruler, you might have a different one that could work. One that I personally really like is this perfect rectangle from Creative Grids. Creative Grids makes really great quality rulers, and this one's a larger size. This can go up to 9.5 inches, which would be a 9-inch finished rectangle. So that's a really great option. Creative Grids also makes a companion to this ruler that you buy separately, but it would be the center, just like I shared with these rulers earlier. So lots of different options with rulers. I think there's probably a few other ones out there. I know Easy Quilting is an option for their Tri-Rex tool, and I'll put some links to these in the description below for you so you can check them out. Now, if templates and rulers are not for you, and you would rather use a die cut machine such as AccuQuilt, you are in luck. AccuQuilt makes dies for lots of different sizes of half rectangle triangles. So for this tutorial, I'll be sharing using this die. You'll see we can cut 2 at a time, but of course we can do lots of different layers, so it makes cutting very quick and very easy. And then this specific die is called the Triangle and a Square Sides, and it is included in the Angles companion set for any of the different sizes of the Mix and Match cubes. So this one is the largest size, but then they also make some smaller ones. This is probably a medium size one, and you can get all the way down to what would be a 1 inch by 2 inch finished rectangle. So lots of different sizes are available, and I have links to all of the different Angles companion sets over in my blog post. So if you have any questions or want more details, I do have an article explaining this tutorial, so be sure to check out the link in the description below. Head over to my website, homemadeamzn.to, and you can find all this information written out there, including all the links you might need. So once you've decided whether you're using templates, rulers, or AccuQuilt to cut out your fabrics, you're ready to get started. The first thing I always recommend doing is prepping your fabrics before cutting. This is a step that many quilters skip, but I promise you it will make it so worth it in the end, and it makes the process so much easier. When you prep your fabrics, I personally recommend using a hot iron and a spray bottle filled with Best Press. If you've watched any of my tutorials before about making specific quilt blocks, you've probably seen me prep my fabrics already. So you can go ahead and skip this part if you want. I personally use the scentless Best Press. I buy it by the gallon and then I fill up a spray bottle with it. If you have a starch that you already use and love, definitely use that. There's nothing wrong with different brands of starch. It's just that Best Press is my personal favorite starch alternative. I'll show you just how easy it is to prep your fabric before we start cutting. So I take my spray bottle. This is filled with some scentless Best Press, and I've got my nice iron all heated up. I spread out my fabric on my ironing board, and I just give it a little spritz of my Best Press. Once the fabric is sprayed, I'll go ahead and fold the fabric over on itself and press it down just to help the fabric absorb that Best Press that I just sprayed in. Certain fabrics will absorb it a little easier than others, but if you're noticing beading on top of the fabric, that's a great option. And then you just go ahead and take your iron and gently let that iron dry the Best Press. You're not rubbing real hard here because we don't want to distort the fabric. You'll just gently glide the iron and let it sit for a second or two until your entire fabric has been pressed nice and flat and is a little bit more crisp from that Best Press or starch. If you've got multiple pieces of fabric, go ahead and just take your next piece of fabric and lay it on top and do the same exact steps. Once your fabrics are completely dry, we're ready to start cutting out our triangles. Next up, let's talk about the right and the wrong side of the fabric for these HRTs before we start cutting. You'll notice there are different shapes that we get after we sew the triangles together. There'll be a left and a right triangle side. So in order to make sure that we're getting an equal amount of both, we're gonna want to make sure that we're cutting our fabric with it folded so that we have 2 mirror images of each other. I'll show you exactly how to do that now. First things first, I'll show you with the ruler option. If you're using AccuQuilt, I'll show that in just a bit. If you're not using AccuQuilt, you'll be able to skip through that part. Throughout this video, you'll see there are chapters within YouTube that you can skip ahead to different parts. So feel free to use those and skip ahead to whatever parts you might need. So the first thing I'll do with using the rulers is I'll cut a strip of fabric that is the exact height of the triangle that I'm going for. So for this one, this is a 6.5 inch rectangle. I'm going to use the whole thing. So I'll cut a strip of fabric that's 6.5 inches. Once you have that strip of fabric cut, this is where we'll fold our fabric to make sure that we're getting mirror images. So I'll fold it, just for the sake of this video, I'm folding it wrong sides together, but honestly it doesn't really matter as long as it's folded. Then I'll take my ruler. I'm going to start by trimming off a little bit of excess that we have here, so that we start off with a nice crisp edge. And then you can flip around your fabric. We're going to line up the edge of the ruler with the edge of the fabric and cut on this diagonal seam. Let's take a moment just to talk about the fabric grain. We want the woven pieces of the threads within the fabric to be along the 90-degree angle of our triangle. And then this diagonal is going to be on the bias, which means it's a little bit stretchier. We have to be very careful when we're handling these triangles after they've been cut. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I'll go ahead and cut on that diagonal. And then you'll notice most rulers do have a little notch at the corner. I'm going to trim that off just because it'll help with lining it up later on. So once you've done that, you now have two mirror image triangles of each other. You'll notice that if we try to make them look the same shape, there's a wrong side and a right side of the fabric. So that's why we fold it, so we have the mirror images. Next, I'll go ahead and repeat that step using up the rest of my fabric, but you would just cut out however many triangles you need. Go ahead and set aside any scraps that you have, and I'm going to make piles of my left and my right side triangles so I can save them for later. And the next step will be to repeat all of that process with whatever remaining fabrics you have. So maybe it'll just be the other color, or if you're making a bunch, you just repeat all the cutting that you need to do for your specific pattern. Now, if you are using AccuQuilt, it's even easier than using a rotary cutter. You'll see here I've grabbed my AccuQuilt die. You do want to pay close attention here to the fabric grain, of course. So when I lay my die down, I lay it with the label. The label of the die is facing me. And then I'll grab my fabric. I'm going to go ahead, it's already folded from earlier. You'll see I have it folded. So we have that same mirror effect that I just shared so that we get a left and a right side triangle. And then I'll layer it just on top of the die, making sure that you have a little bit of excess on all the sides. And then you'll lay your mat on top. Now you can cut quite a few layers with your AccuQuilt depending on which model you're using. I'm only cutting 2 layers here, but you could definitely go up to 6 with this one. Once you roll it through, I like to slide my mat off if possible. That keeps it from sticking onto the back side of the mat. And then you should be able to just pull your little triangles out. Occasionally a thread will stick. If that's the case, you just grab some little scissors and snip the little thread so that we don't distort our shapes. And then you'll see here we have 2 of each left and right side triangle because we cut them folded with 2 layers. Now you'll see whether you cut with rulers, templates, or AccuQuilt, we have our triangles all ready to go. So now we'll head over to the sewing machine and stitch these 2 pieces together to make our HRT block. So before I begin sewing, I will share a few tips and tricks that I've learned throughout the years that might make this a little bit more easy for you. So first off, if you have a straight stitch needle plate, I put that on my machine so that the little hole underneath where the needle goes is very small, and that just helps keep your machine from eating the little corners of your fabric pieces. I'm using either 50 or 60 weight cotton thread is my personal preference, a nice sharp sewing needle, and then my 1/4 inch foot on my machine. And before I actually start sewing my pieces together, I will stitch on just a little piece of scrap fabric. This is what I call a leader or an ender. So I'll sew on that before I start sewing on my fabrics. That just keeps the threads neat and tidy. So once you've sewn on your leader, you're ready to start sewing your actual triangles together. Regardless of how you cut out your triangles, sewing them will be the same. So you go ahead and place them right sides together. You can use pins here or not, but I like to line them up so that you'll have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You'll want to check the top and the bottom to make sure that there is a little tiny triangle sticking out. That will be where your seam allowance hits. So I'll use a pin here just to hold these in place. You could use 2 pins if you wanted, depending on how comfortable you are with your sewing. But you'll see there's a little triangle on this side, and then there's a little triangle on this side. That means you've lined them up properly. So now I'll just go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A little scant 1/4 inch would be perfect. When you get to the pin, you might want to take it out. Just make sure that you're not sewing directly over the pins. And then when you get to the end, you can go ahead and just cut your threads, but I'll go ahead and stitch on an ender. That makes it so that my machine is ready for the next piece of fabric that I'm ready to sew. Now you'll see your triangles are sewn together. When you open them up, you'll find a rectangle. Next, I'll go ahead and press this seam open. Now you can go ahead and press directly on your ironing board, of course, but I will personally share with you, I'll be using this wool pressing mat. I just find that it makes it a little bit more crisp and flat a little quicker. So I'll use my finger first to finger press that seam that we just sewed, and then come in behind that with a nice hot iron, being careful not to distort the fabric as you go. And you'll see that seam is nice and crisp. You can flip it over again. Maybe you want to press on the other side. I find that not to be super necessary when using the wool mat. But anyway, that is your half rectangle triangle quilt block. The next step would be optional. I personally choose not to, but you can go ahead and square it up. Trimming off these little dog-ear corners is an option, and just making sure that it is the exact size and dimensions that you were hoping for. And that's how you make a half rectangle triangle quilt block the simple and easy way. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Please feel free to drop a comment below if you have any questions, and make sure you check out my article with all of the written instructions over at amzn.to. I also on my website have tons of different tips, tricks, and tutorials, so check it out. Maybe you'll find something new, a new technique, or some project inspiration. If you like this video, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment below just to introduce yourself and say hi. Happy sewing!